Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to this jointly sponsored KEI and the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea book launch for Ken Gause's Coercion, Control, Surveillance, and Punishment, a Guide to North Korea's Internal Security Agencies. We are thrilled to work with our friends at HRNK, but particularly our friend Greg Scarlatoiu, the Executive Director. I know he's doing tremendous work, and we are so happy to work with him on this book launch today. I want to recognize a few important people in our audience that are attending our event. First of all, I would love to introduce to you Ambassador Robert King, who's sitting here in the front row. And we also have many distinguished members of HRNK's board. First, the co-vice chair, Suzanne Schulte. Also, another co-vice chair, Gordon Flake. And members of the board, Dr. Katrina Lantos-Sweat. Dr. Marcus Nolan, Ms. Helen-Louise Hunter, who's actually here with us, Mr. Chuck Downs, who was a former executive director of HRNK, and Mr. Kim Kwang-jin, who is a non-resident fellow at HRNK. Today's volume is the third volume released this year by HRNK about North Korea's society and oppressive political system. April, many of you have attended that event where a book on North Korea's political prison camp was released. And then in June on North Korea's social classification system. And today, I am sure you'll have just as an informative and thrilling presentation by our speaker, Mr. Ken Gause. I know many of you are probably familiar with his work on North Korea's leadership and attended some of his other events, analyzing who's in and who's out in the North Korean leadership structure. And with recent news about Vice Marshal Lee Young-ho being removed from power, understanding the political structure, its stakeholders, and the work of HRNK are probably more important than ever. It was a great pleasure to read this fascinating volume by Ken, where he introduces to us the convoluted and complex network of institutions that North Korea has developed to control not only the masses, but its top leadership. I was struck by 3 points while reading this book. One is, despite how much we talk about the opacity and closed nature of North Korea, we still know we are learning more and more about the inner workings and the processes and the stakeholders involved, even about North Korea's secretive security apparatus. We've heard about information getting in through cell phones and DVDs and radios, but now we are getting important information out. Of course, there is much more still to be learned and much is shrouded in mystery, but we are working in a different information environment regarding North Korea today. The second point that struck me was I was a bit uneasy about. Although North Korea's security web is multi-layered and vast, it is also deliberately fragmented and designed to be competitive in order for these different agencies to keep an eye on each other and only accountable to the top leader, the Kim family. The military is not the only agency with sole monopoly over violence, but there are other competing security organizations that can inflict violence. So I wondered, could this be the institutional ingredients for civil war if the elite support for the regime start to break up? Because now there are many sources of violence throughout society. And the third point I was struck by was, even with this web of control, we hear about DVDs, illegal cell phones, radios, TVs, and outside culture flowing into North Korea more than ever. What does this mean? Could this suggest that even North Korea's coercion, control, surveillance, and punishment network is losing its effectiveness? What does this mean for the stability of the regime that depends on promoting fear and ensuring strict loyalty to the regime? I hope Ken can help us answer some of these questions today. And thank you again to our co-host, HRNK, for this opportunity to organize today's event. I now turn over to today's moderator, Executive Director, Greg Scarlatoiu, who will introduce our speaker and discussants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. We're very grateful to Dr. Abraham Kim and our colleagues at KEI for hosting this event here today. As you all know, we do not have a conference facility at HRNK and never will have one, most likely. So we have depended on the great help of our board members and colleagues at the Peterson Institute, AEI, and today KEI. The author of this third report published by HRNK this year is an extraordinary expert, and it has been an extraordinary pleasure and a very smooth process working with Ken Gause on finalizing this extraordinary project. Ken Gause is a research and analyst with the CNA Strategic Studies International Affairs Group and the Iranian Studies Program. He began his career as a leadership analyst with the U.S. government, specializing in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Since the mid-1980s, he has worked for a variety of defense-related think tanks, where he has had particular interest in this issue of leadership analysis. Prior to joining CNA in 1999, he was Director of Research for Kissinger Worldwide Directory of Defense Authorities. Mr. Gause got his BA in Political Science and Russian from Vanderbilt University and his MA in Soviet and East European Affairs from George Washington University. Ken, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today. I know it's a very hot day, and hopefully that you will find our discussions here, informative and hopefully thought-provoking, and would raise some questions, because while I have a speech here and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, I'm more interested in kind of hearing what's on your mind in terms of these issues. I mean, there is a lot that is covered in this book, everything from the apparatus itself to the history of the apparatus. And I can't touch on all of that, but if there are particular issues that you're interested in, I'd like to try to answer them for you. As Dr. Kim said in his remarks, this is a very fascinating time to be focusing on North Korean leadership issues. As we noted over the last couple of days, we've had a major turnover within the high command in North Korea, and I think that it has profound implications for not only power dynamics within the regime, but also policy implications for the regime. And that is something I think that could, at some point, impact on the internal security apparatus that we'll be talking about today, as the regime goes forward and tries to put together some new policy initiatives that may have raised some hackles within certain segments of the regime. When Chuck Downs came to me in 2009 about doing a book on the North Korean internal security apparatus, I was thrilled at the opportunity to do such a book, but I was also daunted at the notion of trying to crack into such one of the more opaque aspects of the North Korean regime. While there have been numerous books and memoirs that have cataloged the horrors and the unforgiving nature of the Orwellian state that is North Korea, there's been very little scholarship on the apparatus itself and the personalities that are involved in making sure that the North Korean regime remains stable and that the Kim family remains in power. Scholars such as Andrei Lonkoff have done very good work in trying to give the outlines of the history of the apparatus. And there have been a number of South Korean and Chinese and Japanese scholars who have written and kind of analyzed one or another aspect of the regime, but But the problem is that much of this literature is not in English, and also much of it hasn't been published. It is actually in the heads of a lot of different scholars and people who look at these things. And then, of course, there are the books by the committee itself that are a part of this literature and highlight such aspects of the oppression in North Korea as the prison system, which I think was outlined in one of your earlier books that came out last year. This year, David Hawk's book. But to my knowledge, there is no one source where the entire apparatus, from its history to personalities to its organizational structure and to its relevance to the regime's culture, has it been packaged in one place, and that's what I've tried to do in this book here. This book should not be seen as the last word on the internal security apparatus in North Korea, not by a long shot, for there is much scholarship that remains to be done, and there is more information every day coming out that we have to try to piece together to see what this puzzle looks like in the end. So at most, it has pushed the ball down the field a little and added a few more pieces to that puzzle that is the Hermit Kingdom. When I began this project, there were a number of ways that I could go about it. I could have stuck to a cursory examination of the organizational structure and focused on the cultural aspects of the police state. There is a large body of human rights literature that has come out from the Korean Bar Association over the last few years, as well as a number of other bodies that would have provided more than enough material to tell that story. But I decided to take another approach, which is to try to provide as much as possible within the open source a detailed picture about how the apparatus is structured and how it works and who are the key personalities that are responsible for its operation. Essentially a leadership analysis study of the internal security apparatus. This meant not only relying on a wider range and an often very difficult set of sources, both human and written, but also chasing an elusive target that refuses to be nailed down. The research of this book, as I said earlier, began in 2009, so it's been about a 3-year process. From 2009-2010, I conducted extensive research trips to Seoul and Asia, where I met with a number of defectors, such as Wang Chong-yop, and was able to meet with a number of scholars who have done considerable work on elements of North Korea's internal security apparatus. And with the help of several research assistants, I was able to plow through a great deal of literature on how the North Korean regime has kept and continues to keep its population under control. And this was followed by additional trips in the last couple of years to South Korea, China, and Japan to kind of add a finer point on some of the aspects of this book. But beginning in 2010, a new problem began to crop up in the writing of this book, and it was the fact that the Kim Jong-il regime was coming to a conclusion. The succession process was in full swing. Now, this is not usually a problem for books written on opaque regimes, but when one leader replaces the next leader. But when you're trying to deal with a problem that deals with the apparatus that ensures that smooth transition, an apparatus that is made up of key personalities and power dynamics, all of which can change at a moment's notice, it becomes a daunting challenge. So I wrote the first draft of this book in 2010, and turned it in the summer. And no sooner had I submitted the draft that I had to add an additional section to it because of the third-party conference that happened in September of 2010, which people who were attached to the internal security apparatus played a very important role in terms of some of those promotions. After an additional research trips in South Korea and Japan, I submitted another draft at the end of 2011. And then, of course, Kim Jong-il died. And then I had to go back and do another reevaluation, which I submitted another draft. And then, of course, you had the fourth party conference and the Supreme People's Assembly, which occurred in April, and that led to yet another draft having to be done because of the fact that some critical personalities associated with the police state had shifted and some had gained in prominence while others had disappeared altogether. Now, as for what's in the book itself, it's divided into 3 parts. The first part deals with the apparatus itself. and focuses on key elements of the police state. The second part deals with kind of the processes that are involved in the running of the apparatus. And at this point, I'd like to express my gratitude to Chuck Downs, who did the initial edit of the draft and came up with this kind of structure, which I think works very well for what we're trying to do here. And then the third aspect of the draft deals with the history from 1945 until the present, or really up until kind of the end of April. The apparatus, and it talks about, you know, the who's who and how the apparatus evolved, and a lot of the key power struggles that evolved in North Korean history in which the apparatus was involved in, and things such as that. But it becomes clear, and I think this is a major takeaway in the study, although I think it was probably self-evident, is that how critical the police state is to the North Korean regime can be discerned by the fact that its history dates back to the regime's earliest days. As the Soviet Union's 25th Army was rolling through North Korea at the end of World War II and pushing, you know, establishing what would then become the state of North Korea, it started to create bodies, security bodies, along the way that were in charge of a variety of aspects of internal security, and also the court system and the prosecutorial system. These were called bondae, essentially protection and security units. And it was these units, after 1946, when the North Korean state came into play, into being, they were all rolled up into what would become the first internal security organ, which was the Protection and Security Bureau. And this was a rather interesting, for want of a better word, ministry that existed in the cabinet. It was one of the first ones that was created. And it also had very strong ties to the Soviets that were still sitting on the ground in North Korea. They had a lot of their people that were running the day-to-day affairs of that apparatus. And then we saw other aspects of these protection and security units that were in charge of the court system and the prosecutorial system growing up to become what then became the court system and the procurator's office in North Korea. So from the very beginning, in its very early stages, you had the beginnings of what would become the police state in North Korea. And by 1948, in the creation of the North Korean state, the internal security apparatus was alive and thriving. A new massive Ministry of Internal Affairs that boasted some 4,000 to 5,000 employees in its headquarters and oversaw a network of some 12,000 regular police and 3,000 political police down to the village level came into existence. And here we start to see where you can start to pick apart the various elements of what would evolve into the current day security apparatus, and the fact that you had a political police, a secret police that was embedded into this Ministry of Interior. And in the 1950s, it would get broken out into a separate organization unto itself. So you had a quite large ministry that is sitting here that is really kind of has a wide variety of missions. Everything from dealing with orphans and beggars and indigents in the regime, to investigation of crimes and oversights of prisons. Yes, the North Korean prison system was already starting to be developed by 1948. And supervision of political thought through the secret police apparatus that existed there. So at the very beginning, years before Kim Il-sung would be able to put his stranglehold on this regime, the framework for what would become the daunting police state was already in place and was beginning to expand its mandate that it would do throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a laborious history of the internal security apparatus. You can find that in part 3 of this book, which deals with the history of the police state. What I will say is that over 3 decades, you've had 3 major police organizations that have emerged out of this apparatus. The State Security Department, also known as the Ministry of State Security, the Ministry of People's Security, and the Military Security Command. Now, I restricted this study to these organizations basically because these are the main parts of the internal security apparatus, and they are the ones that have police functions. There are other parts of the apparatus that ensure the security and stability of the apparatus and the protection of the Kim family, such as the General Guard Command, but they don't have the wide-ranging police functions that these three organizations have. Now, the State Security Department, often, as I said, referred to as Ministry of State Security, carries out a wide range of counterintelligence and internal security functions, normally associated with what we would call a secret police. It's charged with searching out anti-state criminals, those accused of anti-government and dissident activities, economic crimes, and disloyalty to the political leadership. Political prisons, the Gulag in North Korea, is run out of the State Department's 7th Bureau. So these are the guys that really kind of ensure political thought in North Korea, and they are the ones that handle the cases that end up sending people to the Gulags. It has counterintelligence responsibilities at home and abroad, and runs overseas intelligence collection operations, mainly within China, working to try to bring back defectors that have gone abroad back to the regime, as well as collecting a wide variety of information that is very critical to the stability of the regime. It monitors political attitudes and maintains the surveillance of those who have returned from other countries and gone back to Korea, like recently has happened over the last couple of weeks, where you had a South Korean defector who went back to North Korea. This person would be right now being handled by the SSD. For years, since the 1980s, it was assumed that the SSD had answered directly to Kim Jong-il, because there wasn't a director that was publicly known since the death of the last known director in the late 1980s. But with Kim's death, we learned that this ministry is now headed by Kim Won-hong. And Kim Won-hong is a very interesting figure who has really emerged since 2009 and is very closely tied to Kim Jong-un. He has a background with the General Political Bureau, which oversees the loyalty within the armed forces, essentially the political commissars. And he also was, ironically enough, the head of the Military Security Command before he became the head of the SSD, which I think was fairly interesting. This guy is really steeped in how this apparatus works. And at the leadership events in April at the Fourth Party Conference in the Supreme People's Assembly, he was elevated to the Politburo, the Central Military Commission, and the National Defense Commission. He's one of the few people, along with some of the other people involved in this apparatus, that does sit on all of those bodies, showing that he is really not only vital to the internal security apparatus, but he is a major political player as well. As for the Ministry of People's Security, this is responsible for internal security, social control, and basic police functions. This is the regular police, the ministry that carries out regular police functions within the regime. It's estimated to have around 210,000 security personnel, maintains the law and order, investigates common criminal cases, operates the regular prison system, not the political prison system, monitors citizens' political attitudes, conducts background investigations, conducts the census, that when North Korea does carry out census, oversees civil registrations and registrations of every individual in North Korea and their background, controls individual travel, controls the traffic. So those women that you see standing out in Pyongyang Square that are directing the non-existent traffic, they belong to the Ministry of People's Security. It manages government's classified documents, protects government and party officials, patrols government buildings, and some government and party construction activities. Now, its fortunes have really kind of risen and fallen and risen again since the 1990s. It's considered the weakest of these politically in terms of these three police agencies. In the 1990s, it suffered because of its inability to ensure the order and discipline during the famine years. Its fortunes began to rise in the months after Kim Jong-il's stroke in 2008. It was a leading player in the lead up to the currency revaluation of 2009, after which it suffered another setback and led to the replacement of its minister, Chu Song-song, who was replaced by Lee Mang-soo, a military officer with ties to the General Staff and the National Defense Commission. And under Lee Mang-soo's tutelage, the Ministry of People's Security profile has once again begun to rise, and he has become also a member of the Politburo, the Central Military Commission, and the National Defense Commission. And then finally, there's the Military Security Command, which is the investigative unit of the armed forces. Not only does it provide an additional layer of surveillance to the monitoring the actions of the military beyond what is done by the General Political Bureau, it also contributes to the personal protection of the Supreme Leader. Its primary responsibilities are monitoring the loyalty of the High Command and ferreting out possible coup plots in the armed forces. So over the last few days, when Young Ho was dismissed, I'm sure that the Military Security Command was on high alert and was paying very close attention to the attitudes of essentially general level, flag level officers in the North Korea. In the 1990s, its portfolio began to grow, and it took over some limited non-military investigative missions down at the provincial level. And the Military Security Command, in many respects, is the most shadowy of the internal security agencies. We just don't know a whole lot about this organization. Its lineage is shrouded in mystery. We believe that it started in the 1950s as it emerged out of the Ministry of People's Armed Forces, and its fortunes are intimately tied to the Kim family. It was the Military Security Command that helped ferret out the 6th Corps incident in the mid-1990s, an incident that brought to surface its ongoing turf battle that it has with the State Security Department. And it's ironic then that its previous head, Kim Won-hong, is now the head of the SSD. And Kim was replaced by Cho Kyung-chol, a former General Political Bureau officer in the Air Force. Not much is known about Cho, as he is a recent figure in North Korean politics. And unlike his opposite numbers in the State Security Department and the Ministry of People's Security, he does not occupy any positions in the leading party bodies. Now, those are basically the three major police organizations. In oversight of these agencies, especially the SSD and the Ministry of People's Security, flow up through the party apparatus to the party's administrative department, which is headed by Chung Song-taek, and which is Kim Jong, as you all know, Kim Jong-un's uncle. The chain of command for the Military Security Command runs up through the Ministry of People's Armed Forces, and from there up to the National Defense Commission. And of course, the SSD and the Ministry of People's Security run through the Kim Chung Song-taek up to the National Defense Commission because of the fact that he's a vice chairman on the NDC. The Organization Guidance Department, which of course is one of the most powerful organizations in the party apparatus, also plays a role in oversight of these bodies, and that it has ties into the organizational and political departments in each one of these agencies. But despite all of this oversight, one thing the history of the North Korean police state shows is the almost constant competition and turf battles that exist between these various legs of the triangle. In the 1990s, the SSD and the Military Security Command allegedly squared off in a number of high-profile battles, the Military Security Command taking full advantage of the SSD's attempts to sweep corruption under the rug. So at that time, you had the Military Security Command was elevated in its profile, and the SSD was essentially put in a doghouse, a place where it's really kind of remained up until the last few years, where it's really kind of hit up its profile. All right, I see I only have a few more minutes to go, so I will speed through this. The other part of the apparatus that the report looks at is the structure of the Immun, which is the neighborhood or people's group that constitutes the basic cell of North Korean social structure. It is through this apparatus that the security apparatus is able to monitor people, even in their households, on a daily unit on a daily basis, and these various household units then report up to the internal security apparatus. The second part of the book deals with how the process or the apparatus operates. It deals with, discusses the internal security apparatus's informant networks. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of informants that exist in North Korea that report on a variety of different things, both up to the State Security Department as well as to the Ministry of People's Security, that really kind of keep the population, the monitoring and surveilling of the population is quite extraordinary and beyond anything that I've ever seen looking at any other totalitarian apparatus. I talk a little bit about investigation and detention and how these various agencies look at, conduct investigations into various quote-unquote crimes by the North Korean population, and how those are then processed through the trials, some of which actually take place and some of which don't. And many of them take place behind closed doors. And then I talk finally about the punishment aspect in North Korea, a little bit about the prison system, as well as executions and how they are carried out in North Korea, some of them being high profile, while other ones taking place behind closed doors. So in conclusion, in 2012, the North Korean regime finds itself faced with many problems that threaten internal security and internal stability. Not only is the country facing another year of food shortages, but Kim Jong-il's death raises many questions about the regime's stability at the top. The information cordon that once surrounded the country has deteriorated, and information about the outside world filters in through cell phones, DVDs, and surreptitious radio and television monitoring. North Korean leaders talk ceaselessly about efforts to pave the way for a great and prosperous state, but such a strategy seems doomed to failure by any stretch of logic. And looking forward to the future, many North Korean watchers have already begun to speculate about the eventual collapse of the Hermit Kingdom. How can it continue to defy gravity? Just as the Soviet Union collapsed and Mao's China evolved, certainly the Kim's family dynasty cannot continue as it has, living in the dark ages, refusing to join the community of nations. Or can it? Whether or not North Korea collapses, evolves, or continues to muddle through will depend a great deal on the viability of the internal security apparatus. And for 60 years, this all-pervasive apparatus has ensured the survival of the Kim family dictatorship. In recent years, however, rumors have begun to seep out that through the defector community that cracks may have begun in the repressive system, with the security personnel being more susceptible to bribes, discipline among provincial-level police waning, members of the Immun turning a blind eye, and even the public taking retribution against members of the police force. Is this an indication of the beginning of the end? Unfortunately, with the opaqueness which surrounds the North Korean state, it is impossible to tell. At best, scholars and intelligence analysts can only watch and continue to piece together the puzzle. But one thing is clear: as long as the regime continues to adhere to the tactics of the police state to hold on to power, human rights in North Korea will continue to be violated, and the unfortunate citizens of the country will continue to live in the shadows. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a most insightful presentation, Ken. We're very fortunate today to be able to feature three most distinguished experts as discussants. If we are able to produce these reports and if we are able to put together these extraordinarily well-attended events, we owe it to the hard work and dedication of Chuck Downs, who was Executive Director of this organization for 3 years between 2008 and 2011, and a board member since the establishment of HRNK in 2001 until 2008. Chuck is the author of Over the Line, North Korea's Negotiating Strategy, a top quality book on negotiating with the North Koreans, truly to be included in any course on North Korea. Chuck has decades of experience with the Pentagon and with the U.S. Congress. He has served as Deputy Director for Regional Affairs and Congressional Relations in the Pentagon's East Asia office. He graduated from Williams College a while ago. Without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to my illustrious predecessor, Chuck Downs.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for those very kind comments and for inviting me to the release of this very important study. And thank you for taking over from me about a year ago. HRNK has always had a very unique mission as a human rights advocacy organization. It has had to deal with a major block against human rights in North Korea. And that block exists here in the United States. How many times have we heard, we don't know what's going on in North Korea, we don't know anything about North Korea? It's been HRNK's mission to find out what we don't know and to explain to people what we do know. Because in fact, we know a great deal. And in fact, I think we know enough. Everything we know about North Korea is alarming, and many things are distressing. And it's important for us to continue to realize what we do know about North Korea. Today's report is an excellent example of just how much is known about the specifics of some of the internal, highly secret operations of the North Korean state. And thank you, Ken, for doing it. As you were talking about all of the drafts and the changes that had to be made, I began to wonder, has any eminent scholar of your standing ever devoted so much time, so much effort to such an important study through so many drafts for so little money? And I think the answer may be no. I'd also like to thank a number of people who aren't mentioned in the report, but they worked on the Gause report in many background ways, some of which Ken himself could not have known. They include Nicholas Rodman, Christopher Kim, Isaiah Ju, Hasten Chung, Puran Chung, Harold Olson, Jason Keller, Samantha Leticia, David Park, and many others who worked with HRNK at the time. We always wanted to point out the human rights violations of the structures that Ken so intensely described in the report. We wanted to put in stories that showed the kinds of violations of human rights, and so a number of interns spent countless hours going through testimony of defectors, some of which was written only in Korean, but they were able to read this, translate it, and put in stories that HRNK has amassed. Some of those stories are reflected here, and it was their work that brought that part of this study to bear. I think it's a beautiful study, by the way, and I don't know who designed the cover, but I think that's great as well.
Mark.
One of the things that I'd like to, I have only 2 points to make today, and we sort of conspired. We wanted to make sure that we didn't all say the same things about Ken's report. So you'll hear very different things. That doesn't mean that we don't agree with everything else that is being said. But the first point I'd like to make is that these so-called security agencies, and sometimes truly erroneously called security services, are in fact systematic violators of human rights. They exist solely to keep people from expressing their thoughts, their will, from having independent action. They exist solely to administer the wishes of the man on top, the leader of North Korea, whoever he may be. And this has been the case now through 3 generations of Kims. It's worth noting that when the report describes the official functions that the agencies are said to serve, such as handling routine criminal acts, quite often that is not what they are doing. They are not handling criminal acts. These are not police in any American city giving Miranda rights to citizens. Ken has led the Korea watching community for many years, and I can say that, in trying to learn what the actual functions of specific jobs are in North Korea. When Hwang Jong-yap came to Washington in 2002, partly because Suzanne Schulte invited him, he told members of Congress that a leading member of the Supreme People's Assembly, he thought they would be very interested in this, was actually the person in North Korea who was in charge of relations with Cuba. Quite often, they allow their officials to have functions that are completely distinct from what it appears to be on paper. So the traditional political science analysis that everybody knows from their comparative political science class does not apply to North Korea. You cannot assume that people are restricted to the function they seem to serve. I keep a personal artifact that I collected after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1990. Everybody was taking pieces of the wall, and I got a few of those as well. But I had a chance to buy a paperweight that was used by the unit of the Stasi who killed their fellow citizens as those citizens attempted to cross the wall. The security forces had as a paperweight an emblem that says on it, the protector, in German of course, the protector of the rights and the welfare of the German people. I don't doubt for a second that many people who enlisted in the security agencies of East Germany were able to accommodate their own minds to thinking that they were actually somehow protecting their country, even as they were shooting people. And I think that there were people dying 2 weeks before November 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, at the hands of their countrymen who were shooting them. But even these people learn as time goes on that they are the cruelest arm of a terrible tyranny. Eventually, people have to come to grips with that. Eventually, I think they realize it. KKJ, when he speaks, Kim Kwang-jin, when he speaks, can tell you more about that phenomenon from a perspective of somebody who had a privileged position in North Korea. But the first point I would make is that to survive, they must be ruthless, and in the end, other ruthless people will take over for them. Actually, this is you can relax, that's my second point. When I first read Ken's draft back in 2008 or 2009, I was amazed at how sympathetic I felt for some of the people who were listed in the back. Read their bios, read the stories that are put in little boxes throughout the report, and you'll see that most of them end up being killed after a lifetime of service to their leader. Look, for example, at the story being told on page 118 of the report. But these are not unusual. As Dave Maxwell likes to say, quite often service in the North Korean regime leads to death by lead poisoning, meaning the lead of bullets. The point is especially significant this week when we've seen that Lee Young-ho was replaced by somebody from a completely obscure command with no similar ranking. I think that we should realize he is a placeholder until he too is killed, purged, or gotten rid of at the end of his career. Look at all those faces at the end of the report. Now, Helen-Louise is coming next, and I just want to make one last comment about her work in the past. Very few people know, and I hope she doesn't object to my saying this, that early on, many decades ago, she participated in rescuing a person who was high-ranking from North Korea. And from that source, we obtained some of the best information available in 1980 about North Korea. She was able, through the efforts of Congressman Solars, who insisted that this information be made public, to release a book called Kim Il-sung's North Korea. And the report that we're seeing today, I think, is a fitting extension of all of the work that she has done. One last point, if I could very quickly. Kim Kwang-jin was a wonderful person to have in the next office for 2 years. And twice I asked him what North Koreans knew about the prison system that the government says does not exist. The first answer was, if somebody's hammering and misses and hits their hand, others will joke, off to the gulags with you. Later on, in one of the last months that KKJ was here in Washington, I had dinner with him and his family and asked him again about the prisons and how they react when they know somebody's being sent to a prison. He told me the chilling story that when they know someone is going to be going off to a gulag, they buy them garden tools, quietly drop them off at their front door. And I said, garden tools? Why? And he said, because if they don't have garden tools, they cannot survive. We can't tell them what we feel. All we can do is give them the means of survival. So thank you, Greg.
Chuck, thank you very much for your remarks. The answer to your question is Rosa Park designed the report cover. She's taking pictures right now. She's our photographer today. She has designed all 3 report covers this year. When we published the report authored by Bob Collins on North Korea's social classification system, Songbun, many realized that very little, if anything, had been written in English about North Korea's social classification system. All of our board members at HRNK remember that it was Helen-Louise Hunter was the first U.S. expert to write in English about North Korea's social classification system. Author of Kim Il-sung's North Korea, Helen-Louise is currently an attorney working in a private practice with a large international law firm in Washington, D.C. She was a Far East specialist at the Central Intelligence Agency, and she has also served as permanent law clerk in the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland. We continue to benefit tremendously from her advice and expertise, and we are very happy to feature Helen-Louise as one of our discussants today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. As a member of the board of the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, I'm very happy to be here celebrating the publication of Ken's book on the internal security agencies. It's the 19th, I believe, in our series of basic research projects that the committee has sponsored over the last 10 years. And we think they've all been good. But I think that this is one of the most surprisingly excellent ones and one of the most important. I think when you hear about a report on internal security agencies, it doesn't sound like a very exciting subject, and I didn't expect it to be. I guess what comes to mind is some organizational charts of some confusion and maybe lists of bureaucrats whom you won't remember who fill the top positions, and very little storyline, if any. But when the country's North Korea, where a father and son combo conspired for over 60 years to build the most perfected police state that the world has ever seen, you have a very compelling storyline, which is simply one of increasing control of the security agencies over every aspect of the people's lives and increasing control of the Kim family over the internal security agencies. I think Kim's study is fascinating because it's the story of an amazing accomplishment, amazing and horrifying, and because it's such a unique story of the most ruthless totalitarian system that the world has ever known. The report is also surprisingly readable, not just a collection of organizational charts and lists of people, although they are there, and some of the charts are a little complicated and obtuse, perhaps. But they and the photos of the top leaders and the expanding buildings of the secret agencies are an intelligence coup of their own, and they add immensely to the story. I think Ken covered pretty well a point I wanted to make, that very little of this kind of information is available. Most of the work that's been done has been done by South Koreans and Japanese and is of somewhat sketchy quality, not at all like the comprehensive study that he has produced. And very little of that has been translated into English. So Ken's report is truly groundbreaking in its contribution to Western analysis of North Korea. When I was working on North Korea in the US government in the late 70s and 80s, we didn't have any sorts of this information available. A little bit on the Soviet leadership, a little bit more on the Chinese leadership, but absolutely nothing on the North Korean leadership. Not even any good biographies of any of the top leaders, such as the biographies that Ken puts at the end of the study. Let me suggest why I think this kind of information will be so useful to North Korean analysts. I'll take the example of 1994, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the aid that North Korea had become reliant on was cut off, and a year of droughts was followed by a year or more of floods, which led to the starvation and death of millions of people, and the maiming and stunting of the North Korean youth, who would be the country's future labor force. And then Kim Il-sung would die unexpectedly of a heart attack. Many of the best analysts in this country, with good reason, were predicting the collapse of the North Korean regime. Ken's report tells us why, gives us an insight into why that didn't happen. While the government proved dysfunctional in dealing with the economic calamity, it was able to accept the temporary loss of control over the economy that it could later reassert, so long as it maintained control of the internal security apparatus that ensured the survival of the Kim family. That's exactly what it did. It temporarily surrendered control of certain areas of the economy that we thought we would normally think much more crucial to a leadership, but tightened control over the internal apparatus. Once again now, the Kim regime is facing some similar problems, like shortage of food and a second succession crisis, which raises questions about whether the regime will survive. Having read Ken's report, I'll be much more inclined now to give weight to the tidbits of information that we can glean about the internal security system, turnover in agency personnel, and the frequency of their personal appearance with Kim Jong-un, suspicious deaths and suicides, purges, changes in the security agency's tactics. More weight to that than to reports of bad harvests due to poor weather, falling imports of food, and domestic dissatisfaction over currency reevaluations. Those things that didn't interfere with Kim's increasing control over the security apparatus in the crisis of 1994. I don't know how I could better describe or give you a feeling for what I think is the importance of this book than to tell you that I think it will actually change analysis, giving priority to certain factors when we deal with North Korea. For our Committee on Human Rights in North Korea, the report has a sobering message. So long as the security agencies continue to use the tactics of the police state, the challenge that our committee and like-minded agencies face will not be lessened. The report raises many interesting questions, such as does one's knowledge and appreciation of the role and methods of North Korea's internal security agencies incline one to think that reform of the system has to come from the top, there being so little likelihood of people's power against the power of the internal security agencies. I want to conclude with one final thought, which was actually the thought that I had most strongly on first reading the report, which is that I think this report should be of considerable interest to many more than just North Korean observers. It has a much larger message and appeal in that it captures the very essence of a totalitarian regime, where every aspect of people's lives are scrutinized by a ruthless and an unlimited power with unscrupulous methods. A regime that truly deserves the classification of being the most awful of human societies that the world has known. I'd recommend this report to any student of comparative government. If you're unsure of the difference between a dictatorship or authoritarian government on the one hand and a totalitarian government on the other, and some personal experiences of mine have in fact led me to believe that many people don't really know the difference. You need only to read this report, and you'll have a very clear understanding and feel for a totalitarian regime. If I were to suggest one small change, it might simply be to change the subtitle to indicate something of the broader significance of the report. Instead of reading a guide to North Korea's internal security agencies, oh, I see it's been changed even yet, an examination of the North Korean police state, I think I might suggest North Korea's internal security agencies, a manual for totalitarian regime. The report shows exactly how the two Kims accomplished just that, without a manual, to be sure, but with unerring foresight and ruthless determination. Thank you.
Helen-Louise, thank you very much for insightful remarks that help us understand even better the value of this extraordinary report. Okay. Going back to our gratitude to Chuck Downs, we are grateful to Chuck for having established this relationship with Kim Kwang-jin, who is more than a colleague, he's a friend, he's our non-resident fellow in Seoul. We have benefited tremendously from his expertise. He has authored 2 HRNK reports and is currently working on our next report on the circulation of information inside North Korea, a report to be released this fall. Kim Kwang-jin has so many degrees from South and North Korea that I wouldn't be surprised if he was working on another one. He is certainly very well known for having played a significant role in the North Korean overseas economic activities. He is the one who has shed light on North Korea's insurance fraud, and insurance companies have benefited tremendously from his testimony and his expertise. We are delighted that he happens to be in town, and he was very happy to join us here today as a discussant. Kwang-jin.
Thank you. To begin with, I should have to apologize sincerely that my last name is also Kim. But, I have different Kim, different Kim of origin. I'm from Kim-hae. But those Kims, 3 Kims, are from Jeonju. So I'm not that much
Anybody?
This paper is so much impressive. It is the manual that tells everything of internal security apparatus in North Korea. And, on page 14 and 15, I should say that it contains the essence of this paper. I should read. The italic paragraph on page 14. In North Korea, the teachings of Kim Il-sung, the words of Kim Il-il, and the precepts and principles of the party have come to function as legal structures. Because of this, actual criminal law has lost much of its meaning. The directive of official successor Kim Jong-un have also taken a super legal applications. His directives have been used most prominently in cracking down on and punishing defectors. Next page. Following Kim Il-sung's death in 1994, his son Kim Jong-il assumed power, and his dictates overruled the supreme law. The Korean Bar Association has pointed out that in North Korea, the hierarchy of law is Kim Jong-il's and Kim Il-sung's words, Workers' Party instructions, the Socialist Constitution, other statutory laws, and finally, rules and regulations. The security agencies serve only the leader himself. Their severe methods of coercion and control are not in service of law or of the people of the nation. I think these two paragraphs tell us exactly how the security apparatus in North Korea is functioning. So I should suggest that the title of this paper should be Paper or Work on Illicit North Korean Police State. So the legal system there is illegal actually. It is functioned, is structured illegally. That means the apparatus is structured to serve only Kims and defend Kims. And what they do is focused on only these things. They are not for the defense of the people's security. They are not working for the people there, for the nation. But their task and their job is totally focused on defending the Kim's rule and Kim's authority. Throughout the history of building this security system was also is the same with the change of the leadership throughout 3 generations. So it matches together. I'd like to put your attention to the recent developments in North Korea. And Ken Gause said that he changed it, he made several drafts of this, but I think it would be very difficult to update, update to what's going on now. North Korea, with Kim Jong-un's nomination and appointment as the next ruler, they announced the amnesty openly, publicly, and put into effect of this amnesty. This is very important change we can see in North Korea now. And also, they recently one defector has gone back to Pyongyang, and she had an interview publicly. And I think it is not good interview for North Korean authorities, because they should accept that there are defectors, and she's in 70s, but she's in good shape. And all these North Koreans in 70s or 60s, they are so slim, malnutrition, so they are living in difficult situations, but they still made her interview in the public and talked in front of a lot of journalists. So this is another change happening in North Korea. And they also replied to United Nations human rights organization, I think, one institution, about Dr. Or's family issue. What happened to his wife and what happened to their daughters. So this is another new phenomena happening in North Korea, and it is, if I say they're increasing their transparency, it is too much, too good word to say that they are having, transparency, but they are, and Kim Jong-un even appeared in public with his wife. And last time when Kim Jong-il was, giving the spot guidance, so-called spot guidance, their documentaries and, the media release were made, after 1 week or in 10 days, but now within a day or two, they are releasing these documentaries and movies. I mean, the pictures. So I should say that they are releasing and releasing more information about their leadership and showing, as compared to their past and as compared to the records, they are becoming a little bit more transparent now. And for the security organizations, I don't know whether it is the proper wording, but there is a phenomenon of militarizing the security apparatus. They change it, their police ministry into Kwan-kun, Immun Kwan-pu, similar to the Ministry of Defense. And they created police forces, and they put the combat forces of the police. They are wearing different uniforms now, similar to the military. So this is another phenomenon taking place in North Korea. So we need to pay attention to these things, what's going on in North Korea, and see what will bring, what kind of result they will bring with these changes. Thank you for your attention.
Kwang-jin, thank you very much. We're delighted that you're here with us today. Kwang-jin and Helen-Louise, I am sorry we can no longer change the report title. It's already gone to print. Since we began a little bit late, I would suggest that we have 10 minutes of overtime so that we can take a few questions. Please keep your questions brief. Remember to identify yourselves and your affiliation, and please also let us know if you're directing a question to all panelists or to a particular panelist. Yes, sir.
I'm Peter Humphrey. I'm an intelligence analyst. Dr. Kim, I imagine there are 3 reasons. One, that a young man would join the apparatus. Perhaps it's family tradition. Perhaps he drank the Kool-Aid, as they say. Or perhaps he looks forward to the opportunities for bakshish. Which of those 3 do you think is the most important for the young men who are being recruited into these organizations?
I'm sorry I didn't get, Would you please?
I say there are 3 reasons one might join, a young man might join these organizations. One is the family tradition. His father was in the organization. No, a young man. Young man.
Yeah,
He's thinking about joining the police after that.
Yes.
He has 3 possible motivations.
Yes.
One, his family has done this, his uncle, his father. 2, he actually believes it. We say he drank the Kool-Aid. He's actually a fanatic himself. Or 3, he has opportunities to make money. Many opportunities to make money from his position in the security apparatus. So those are 3 major motivations for joining these organizations. Which of those do you think might be the most important?
Making money, because this sometimes these siblings of the security guys they join these organizations, but it is not common. It is not that much common. So I should say that, to have a better job, to have a better living, they join this organization.
Well, since, yes, sir, please, in the back.
Mr. Gause, thank you very much for writing the book. It's going to contribute a lot to the scholarship. I had a question about the time, when the time comes that the Kim regime collapses, what policies are in effect by the United States government, the South Korean government, to protect the people in the prison camps?
I would leave that to one of these other panels. I don't know what the planning would be. I suspect that there would be some planning that is part of our establishing a footprint up north that would involve, seeking out and securing the prisons, or there is a possibility that some of these people could be let out during the process of the collapse, and but having to deal with the humanitarian crisis that is most likely going to be facing our forces and the South Korean forces and even the Chinese forces as we go into that country is going to be quite daunting. Whether there are specific plans in place for dealing with the prison system, unfortunately, I just don't know.
Chad O'Carroll.
Hi there. As you may know, we're live streaming the event today, and we have a question from one of our Twitter followers for you, Mr. Gause. And it's, does Ri Yong-ho's removal indicate greater party control over the military? And what was Ri Yong-ho's position on North Korea's direction?
Again, this is something that is highly speculative, but it is something that the Pyongyang watching community is watching very closely. My own personal view is that Ri Yong-ho, extreme hardliner, somebody that was a very strong supporter of the military first policy. I think he got crosswise with the direction that Kim Jong-un and his supporters, primarily Chung Son-taek, Chae Lang-hae, Kim Kyung-hui, are trying to take this regime, which I think part of it is to try to deal with some of the issues that they're dealing with in terms of the dilapidated economy and that they're looking for a way of recalibrating some of their policies. I believe that if you were to look at some of the Kim Jong-un statements along these lines to suggest the possibility of no longer belt tightening in North Korea, which I think is code word for the military first policy, I think that probably got in crosswise with elements of the high command. And I believe that this removing Ri Yong-ho and replacing it with Hyun Yong-chol, which is the former commander of the 8th Corps and somebody whose political credentials within this regime are very weak compared to Ri Yong-ho, that this gives him a lot more latitude, and Chung Son-taek, his advisor and his advisors, a lot more latitude to carry out some of these policy changes.
Yes, please.
Daily NK that there was a first peasant uprising after people sent balloon leaflets into North Korea after the fall of Egypt and all of that. And so I'm wondering, what does that mean, I guess, for the country? Is that just a glitch, do you think, or do you think it means more?
Well, I am not one who believes very strongly that you're going to see an Arab Spring in North Korea. I just don't believe that is in the culture of a country who has essentially been under the boot now for almost 100 years. Going back to the time in which Japan occupied parts of Korea. I believe that very strongly in the notion that Andrei Lankoff holds out there, which is that information is seeping into the regime, and as more of this information that can seep in is going to position, I think, the population to better deal with when the eventual collapse comes. But to think that this regime is just going to, that this population is going to rise up in major numbers like we were seeing in Egypt, or we're seeing in Syria or Libya and places like that. I think that that's a completely different culture, a different social network and social structure that would allow that, a different type of regime that doesn't have the lockdown power that the internal security and apparatus in North Korea does. So I just really don't think you're going to see it, but I think that that you will see some disturbances, especially around the markets. There was a lot of pushback when the regime tried to crack down on the markets, and I think that is something that really caught the regime's attention. I frankly just don't, I think they are struggling with trying to figure out how to deal with the situation of information management, which is becoming more proliferating throughout the country, and I think that it's going to continue, and I think that that's something that they're trying to struggle with how to deal with it.
The final question will be Chris Nelson's.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks. Chris Nelson, Nelson Report. Ken, thanks so much for a great report, and thanks for repeatedly reminding us all that Andrei Lankov has talked about this stuff for years. As you know, I quote him all the time, and once you talk to Andrei, you have to love the guy. Let's ask that same question in reverse. If it's simply not possible because of the security apparatus to expect an Arab Spring a bottom-up, then the chances for a change that is not simply a collapse is top-down, and which means, in a sense, the Burma model, if we're going to look at Asia, and people like my son Anthony, who's at the Business Council, tell me one of the impetuses for Burma was the more their diplomats got out and around, the more their senior military guys got around to traveling, they realized, oh my God, we are really falling behind. Is it too soon to be thinking that there might be an element of that in this new leadership cadre that's surrounding the boy wonder? He himself must have learned something in Switzerland. Or what's your take on a top-down, because they've actually seen a bit of the world now? Thanks.
I think there are two things. One, in terms of the widespread travel of senior North Korean officials abroad, that's still held in fairly close check. You saw much more of this during the Kim Il-sung period, when you would have people being educated in Eastern Europe and places like that, and bringing back knowledge then than you would see now, and definitely not under Kim Jong-il, and definitely we haven't seen it yet. That being said, I think that there is more informational awareness now in the senior leadership than there has been in a long time. I think that the information is getting in. And the interesting thing, the way that this regime is constructed, which really started under Kim Jong-il, and actually is through Kim Jong-il's heir apparent stage, which was really the late 70s up until 94, is creating a system that is in competition with itself, where you essentially have various institutions and individuals that are essentially leveraging off against each other and keeping each other off balance, so that you have the supreme leader that is able to really kind of control and manipulate things. Well, the question comes then, what happens when that center becomes weakened somewhat, either by the removal of a linchpin such as Kim Jong-il, or these tensions start to grow up amongst these various stakeholders within the regime. I think that there is a potential for having tension at the top, and if I were to kind of come up with a scenario on how you could have a collapse, I see it as being a top-down as opposed to a bottom-up phenomenon.
Ken, before we conclude, I did not want to put him on the spot, because I know that he doesn't really appreciate the attention, but Shin Dong-hyuk is here with us today. Many of you may have noticed he is the hero of Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden. If you haven't read this book yet, I definitely highly recommended it. It's playing a tremendous role as far as the North Korean human rights movement is concerned. Before we conclude, I would like to thank all of you for following us so thoroughly. This wouldn't be possible without having you attend all of these North Korean human rights events. Please do continue to follow us. Please do check out our website, hrnk.org. All of our publications are available there. I would like to thank Dr. Abraham Kim, KEI, Linda Kim, and the others, the KEI interns whose names I no longer know since I've been away for 1 year. All of the interns that Chuck Downs has mentioned, and also all of the interns who are credited for their contributions in our report, and all those HRNK interns who have worked